microphone, so if you have trouble hearing at all, please feel free to come in closer or not, whatever you prefer. As you see here, the first image we have is a poster dating from 1857 for a seance of magnetism. Now, before hypnosis was hypnosis, it had many different names, and the fact of the matter is it still has many different names. The principal one at the time, before the Victorian Age, which is approximately 1830 to 1901, the lifespan of Queen Victoria, it was known as magnetism. And it had a couple other names, though this one was the principal of them. Out of curiosity, can I see a show of hands? How many hypnotists do we have here this evening? I see one. I know there's at least two. What would you say hypnotism is? How would you define it?
Putting somebody into their subconscious.
Putting somebody into their subconscious?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Not bad. Any other definitions of hypnosis anybody would like to offer? Wise. There is no actual agreed upon definition of hypnosis. There's no definitive brainwave state. There's no cardinal set of signs or behaviors or something like that says this person's definitely hypnotized. It's always a subjective experience. All we really have is this universally observable phenomena which takes place inside of our attention, which we can talk to about each other and observe. But what it actually is, it's anybody's guess. It's really up to you to decide for yourself what it is. So you know the core principle of all hypnosis is self-hypnosis. So the voice inside of your head at any given time is the most powerful hypnotist in the room. So getting to Victorian hypnosis in particular, here we have Franz Anton Mesmer. And Mr. Mesmer lived before the Victorian Age. He's the person for whom we get the term mesmerism. He was a physician, and in his time had discovered that through accessing the unconscious mind, you could actually resolve symptoms of disease. He was the first person to do this. There was somebody named Paracelsus, or Paracelsus, I'm not quite sure how you pronounce it, but this goes back to the 1500s. And he was the first person to posit that there was an unconscious. And that through delving into the unconscious, we could possibly resolve and or create disease or various states. Anton Mesmer, who was a physician, who lived in the 1700s into the early 1800s, put this to practice in his healing and was able to, through suggestion and through relaxation and through accessing the unconscious mind, was able to relieve patients of their symptoms. Now, he did many of his demonstrations in places called medical theaters. This doesn't happen very often. For we all know what a medical theater is, right? Going back to the Victorian Age where you would have all of these men, let's be honest, they were men, in white coats watching some procedure take place that was presumably clinical in nature. So this is how most of hypnosis at the time was seen and was learned about, the procedures that were learned about. Medical theater, as a practitioner, I got to tell you, I really enjoyed looking at this subject because I feel like the medical theatrics that Mesmer was doing and the people that were also with him in his time, you guys might know hypnosis has kind of got a bad reputation. I think it's the Victorian Age, essentially, where we begin to see this reputation of hypnosis as a tool of fearfulness or mind control or lack of consciousness. All of these things, misconceptions, by the way, utter myths. And as a practitioner, it's nobody's fault. There's no villain here. It's certainly not a consumer's fault, the PR. Hypnosis has a significant PR problem. But that aside, the fact that, or the idea that anybody would be afraid of it is rather silly. Which brings us to the next image. Soak that one in. Early on in the lifespan of hypnosis, what you have essentially is a male power fantasy. Boiled down, another one, I know, shocking, isn't it? So through the medical theatrics and what was being learned about hypnosis and what people fictionalized really as mind control and the line between theatrics and performance and medical clinical tool, which again, this divide still exists today, over 100 years later. We had images like this. The novel Trilby, which some of you might be familiar with, George du Maurier's novel, where the villain, Trilby's villain, was a Svengali. This is where we get the term Svengali from, who used hypnosis to hypnotize his victims. As we see here, and if you do an image search for Victorian hypnosis, you will see this kind of thing over and over again. Usually it is a creepy dude with lightning bolts coming out of his fingertips or his eyes to a docile, unconscious woman. It's those guys in the back that really bother me in this one. Here we have a painting which, if I'm remembering correctly, is called Treatment of Woman with Hysteria. And the Victorian Age. So coming back to the Victorian Age, Queen Victoria and what this meant. As some of you may know, this age was defined by a multitude of things. It was obsessed with prostitution, gave rise to Jack the Ripper, child labor, division of wealth and poverty. You had Charles Dickens, various artists of the day. This gentleman on the right-hand side, this is a man named Jean Charcot. Charcot was a student of Mesmer's. And while Mesmer had realized that through exploring the unconscious mind you could resolve disease, Charcot realized that through the unconscious mind you could actually make people sick. Isn't that fucked up? So in the treatment of hysteria, women who had hysteria at the time, Charcot would often use hypnosis, and again, these medical theaters, well, this is a theater, certainly doing it for the benefit of these students. And Charcot was a gifted hypnotist, without question. Incidentally, one of his students, here he is again, looking rather imperial. One of his students was a young man named Sigmund Freud. Freud, according to history, wasn't very good at hypnosis for whatever reason. As the father of psychotherapy and psychoanalysis, I find that a little bit hard to believe, and I would actually like more detail on exactly how and what the nature of his use of hypnosis was. But legend has it, he was not very good at it, although clearly he embraced these ideas about the unconscious mind and derived from them what would become his models of the mind, which are still those that we work with today. Something a lot of people aren't aware of is Sigmund Freud's nephew, a man named Edward Bernays, founded the field of PR in the late 1940s, early 1950s, using his uncle's ideas about the mind and the unconscious, synthesized with the propaganda techniques of World War II. As that was taking place, Freud's daughter Anna was really spreading the gospel of her father's psychoanalysis and psychotherapy, which again is still the dominant models of the mind and psychotherapy, or you will say mental health, that are in our lives as consumers today. I think too that something crucial must have happened early in Freud's life and late in Charcot's life, where he decides to abandon hypnosis to a certain degree, taking with him the essence, the principles, distilling certain aspects of it, and then forming out of that psychoanalysis. His books, The Interpretation of Dreams, the first one was published in 1899, 2 years before the Victorian Age would officially end, which was really the beginning of Freud's work and the beginning of what would become psychoanalysis and psychotherapy. So somewhere along the way, Freud decides for himself that hypnosis is not the thing, but we're going to go this way with psychotherapy. At that time, of course, hypnosis, alongside its medical use, you have the reappropriation of this for all variety of weird stuff in terms of the culture, which again, still persists today. Here we have Freud's office, which you'll notice the painting of Charcot right above his couch there. This couch that Freud would use is a relic of hypnosis and the work that he did with Charcot, the iconic psychotherapist's couch begins with the hypnotized patient. Bummer, right? Yeah. This, I mean, you know, we can see why we're confused, guys. You know, because on one hand, we have this medical tool that for over 150 years has been clinically researched, measured to death, over and over and over again, and we got to come back every time and be here like, no, guys, it's cool. It's cool. Hypnotherapy is just meditation with an agenda. You don't have to worry about it. And then this stuff pops up. So in the United States, while hypnosis is being somewhat marginalized, and psychoanalysis and psychotherapy are on the rise, you have this kind of appropriation of hypnosis within the culture, which is, you know, marketed to either poke at fear or some other aspect of the unconscious, of the psyche that's going to draw one in. And here we have Carl Jung. Now, the yin to Freud's Jung, as many of you know, probably Jung was instrumental in the exploration of the unconscious mind. Jung and Freud both agreed that the native language of the subconscious mind was symbol, was metaphor. Freud, while believing the unconscious was in majority sexual in nature, Jung diverted from him in that. And he saw, as again most of you or some of you may know, he saw a collective unconscious at work where all of these symbols and metaphors and narratives were springing from, and dove into metaphysics and really incorporated, again, that balance, that counterbalance to what was psychoanalysis and psychotherapy. Jung himself used hypnosis, though he did not focus on it. He would hypnotize his cousin over and over and over again. That was his favorite person to work with using hypnosis, incidentally, but did not use it very often clinically, though he did believe in it. So meanwhile, again, while psychoanalysis, psychotherapy are on the rise in the early 20th century, particularly in the US and in Europe and the Western world, you have hypnosis now being reappropriated into the culture. So before, when I was talking about why I enjoyed researching this, figuring out exactly where and how in Victorian times these fearful ideas of hypnosis really begin in the relationship of medical theater, the treatment of hysteria, the often cruel methods that would be used, and then, of course, these shows about magnetism, the actual theater, hypnosis for performance, which still happens very often. It's kind of like catching the killer and figuring out, oh, so that's where we all went wrong in how to actually think about this thing. Again, nobody's fault. But you know, that's where the messaging, the PR problem begins some 175 years ago and persists to this day. Here we have a lovely man named Dr. Milton Erickson. Anybody here familiar with Dr. Erickson? A couple folks? Yeah, it's a shame to me. This guy is really cool. Milton Erickson did most of his work in the Western United States and is considered by many the father of modern hypnotherapy. There hasn't been a practitioner since like him, and there wasn't one like him before that. The way he used language and narrative, he distilled the ideas of all of these predecessors we're talking about, Mesmer, Charcot, Freud, Jung, including many people we haven't talked about tonight, and used narrative in his therapy in a way that nobody had before. He was also prone to very unconventional approaches. You know, for instance, he had a patient that couldn't afford to see him and was being treated for depression. So Erickson said to him, okay, well, you know, I'll see you for at no charge, but in exchange for my time, you have to agree to feel better. You know, in exchange for my time, you got to promise me you're going to do what you can, compassionately understanding depression stuff. You're going to do what you can to resolve this depression. And the person, you know, agreed. So he would use these unconventional techniques and ways of coaxing his patients and the people that he would work with through suggestion, which is the essence of hypnosis, to healing. Dr. Erickson, in my opinion, again, is a undervalued figure in psychology today. It's certainly very important to me. So, where we are today with hypnosis and hypnotherapy, I think is a pretty cool place. We live, as you guys know, in an age where information is immediately available, and somebody can just do a search on the internet and figure out that hypnotherapy is safe and studied and medically backed and all this other stuff. Integrating all of these ideas together, even an event like tonight happening, where I can tell you as a practitioner, hypnotherapy is little more than meditation with an agenda. There is no such thing as mind control, but we are all highly suggestible. And this is most evident in the messaging that we are surrounded with. We live in the city here where we're constantly being bombarded with messages, advertisements, buy this, do that, everything else. These messages, all branding, exists in the subconscious mind. So, in this time, we can say all of this and know it to a certain extent. I don't claim to have any answers. I think part of the problem, the bigger problem here, is a fundamental failure to understand ourselves and our minds on a certain level. I don't know what the answer to that is necessarily, but having a reasonable discourse, I think, is a means of getting us there. And the performance that we're going to be seeing in a few moments, without knowing what they're going to do, I do already like to think of in terms of the medical theater that we're talking about. That term has been sticking with me as a hypnotist. Our diagnostic tool is not the DSM-4 or something like that, it's just the dictionary itself. And what medical theater suggests to me is kind of inherent in the idea, the disconnect and the balance of what you have in hypnotherapy, and the reputation of hypnotherapy, and the history of hypnotherapy, and that line that it walks of, is this a show? Is it real? What the hell's going on here? So, with that, I don't have the answers, guys, but I'm hypnotized by the questions. And before I conclude, would anybody like to ask any questions? Yes? Was there a question?
Yeah.
Please.
What was your first experience with hypnosis,